And I'd like to welcome you to our 30 at 7:30 here on YouTube. As you know, we have moved to this particular platform. We've been on Facebook for some time, but we now have one live that we do on Facebook, and then we do 30 at 7:30 here every Wednesday evening. It is August the 5th in 2020, and we are, of course, as I'm recording this, still in the middle of the pandemic. And as you know, 30 at 7:30 is a lot of times it's discussion when I'm on here live, but also just as in times past, sometimes I get questions from people about, well, various different topics, different things people will ask me, and then I will seek to answer them here. One of the things that I think is interesting that I've been asked about recently a couple of times and in different ways, all has to do with this idea of spiritual gifts. Spiritual gifts, where's our gift at? Where's our purpose? How do we know what it is? And it's always an interesting question to me because there are tests and assessments that you can take to try to help you determine that. But I don't think that's the best way to determine what you're gifted at. You know, it's interesting. I have in my business assessments, I do assessments on behavioral choices, motivating factors, what motivates people, and also their emotional intelligence. And I believe you can scientifically assess those, but to try to scientifically assess what your purpose is, what your spiritual gift is, that's an entirely different ballgame altogether. So the question becomes, how do we know what our spiritual gift is? I often see people, and I guess the question is an important one, but I think the question that I would come back and ask is, what is it that you do and that you do well? What is it that you like to do? See, it's always been interesting to me when people have talked about God's calling. Well, I feel like I'm afraid God's going to call me to be a missionary in the jungle. And it's always like the to the wall sort of mentality that people have. I'm going to be called to be a missionary in the jungle, and I don't like bugs and I don't like the outdoors. As if God is going to call you to a place that you don't like, in some way punishing you. And the fact of the matter is that we all have been given gifts and talents and abilities. We've all been given certain things that we're good at and certain things that we're not good at. And we've been given those gifts to help us to build up one another. So the question is that we begin with, and how do I know what my gift is what are you good at? What is it that you absolutely like to do? What is it that you would get up in the morning, and whether you got paid or not, and you have all the money in the world, you would still be doing that? See, that's what I think is interesting. I heard of pastors that what we used to call, a friend of mine I would call play the system. There were certain denominations that where you got a pension, and so they would try to stay in that denomination for X amount of years to get a pension just to retire. I'm thinking to myself, that is a miserable way to live, that I'm just looking to get X amount of time in so that I can get out. And folks, this is something that I've said so often. I love what I do right now. Do I have to get paid to do it? Well, yeah. But if I had all the money in the world, what would I do? I'd probably still be seeking to do some form of what I do right now because I absolutely love it. It energizes me. It exhilarates me. And there are people, like I was talking with some people today, like, we don't know how you do funerals. Man, and I said, I actually want to do a funeral more than I want to do a wedding. And people look at me at that point like I am certifiable, like I need to be committed somewhere, that I would say something like that. But it's because at a funeral, people are thinking more about their mortality than they are at a wedding. And so it's a good opportunity to reach people, to see transformation, to see change, and to help people clarify what's important in life. So I think you have to ask the question, what are you good at? See, so often we see the success of what somebody else has in another area, and we think, oh, I'm going to go do that. They're successful. They're achieving the results that I want, the notoriety that I want, the recognition that I want, the money that I want, the fame, the power, popularity, whatever it is that I want. So I'm going to go do what they're doing. The problem is that you may not be equipped to do what they're doing. It may not be your gift, and you're going to be putting the proverbial square peg in a round hole. It won't work. So you have to find and define, what are you good at? You say, well, how do I know that? I think that you have to get some people around you that you trust, that are going to be honest with you and tell you, here's what you're good at. Now, what do you do once you know that? What do you do with that gift? How do you exercise it? Because so often people want the public gifts when they may not be good at that. I've told the story about Charles Spurgeon, when a young man who Spurgeon heard preach came to the Prince of Preachers and says, Mr. Spurgeon, I believe that God wants me to be in ministry, wants me to be a pastor, wants me to preach. I believe that I'm called to preach. Spurgeon looked at the man and he goes, and I believe that you're not. And he looked at, and the young man was devastated. And Spurgeon said he showed absolutely no natural ability to communicate, to talk, and to get up in front of a group. There's a certain amount of it that you can learn, but you can only take the raw talent that's already there and improve on it. You can't teach something that is not already somewhat gifted. So Paul is addressing this issue of giftedness in Romans chapter 12. And I want you to hear what he says. Now, Romans 12, the beginning of it is that famous passage where Paul says, don't be conformed to the world, be transformed, by the renewing of your mind, so that you'll know what God's will is. That which is perfect, good, acceptable. And he says, and he begs everybody to present themselves as living sacrifices. But you jump down to verse 6, and it's very interesting what he says in verse 6. Starting there, he says this: in his grace, God has given us different gifts for doing certain things well. I'm reading from the New Living Translation. So notice that. God has given us different gifts for doing certain things well. In other words, what is it that you do well? So here's what he says. Now watch this. So if God has given you the ability to prophesy, and we would call that preaching today, speak out with as much faith as God has given you. So notice what he says. If God has given you the ability to prophesy, you speak out with as much faith as God has given you. In other words, it's the measure, the ability, the gift is all from God. And he says, so use it with all of your might. Notice this, he says next, if your gift is serving others, serve them well. If you're a teacher, teach well. If your gift is to encourage others, be encouraging. If it is giving, give generously. If God has given you leadership ability, take that responsibility seriously. And if you have a gift for showing kindness to others, do it gladly. I love that. Because the idea is that we should all be kind, but then there's a certain time where kindness is a gift. We should all be willing to teach others, but teaching is also a gift. There are certain levels of this that we're expected to give, we're expected to serve, we're expected to do those things. But there are people that will go over, above, and beyond that because it's their gift. And so he says, don't worry about anybody else. Whatever you do that well. You do you. Don't try to be somebody else. Don't even look at the measure and the amount of a gift that God has given somebody else and complain about that maybe they're more gifted than you in a specific area. But he says, you do it well. Now, he goes on, though, to say, don't just pretend, and then there's this general thing. Don't just pretend to love others, really love them. Hate what is wrong, hold tightly to what is good. Love each other with genuine affection. And take delight in honoring each other. Never be lazy, but work hard and serve the Lord enthusiastically. Rejoice in our confident hope. Be patient in trouble. Keep on praying. When God's people are in need, be ready to help them. Always be eager to practice hospitality. And then he talks about blessing those who persecute you. So the idea here that Paul is talking about, and a little bit of a background on Romans 12, not only do we have this important verse of it's a transitional verse, because he says, I beseech you, chapter 12, verse 1, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God. So he says, because of everything that has happened in these first 11 chapters, I'm begging you, beseeching you, imploring you, pleading with you to present yourselves as a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. He said it's how you worship him, as you give of yourself to him. And that's what he says, don't be conformed, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. But then he talks about, after that, the gifts. How we carry out this spiritual sacrifice of worship, how we present ourselves as a living sacrifice, is presented in those next verses, because we jump down to verse 6. He says, in verse 3, he says, don't think you're better than you really are. Be honest in your evaluation of yourselves, measuring yourselves by the faith God has given us. He says, just as our bodies have many parts and each part has special function, so it is with Christ's body. We are many parts of one body. We all belong to each other. And then he says, in his grace, God has given us different gifts. So the idea is he's moving from the general to the specific. So he says, I beseech you, present your bodies. How do we do that, Paul? He says, your spiritual service of worship. How do we do that? Don't be conformed, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so you know what God's will is. And then he goes into how each of us have to do our part. Each of us are part of the body of Christ. And so that's when he talks about prophesying and teaching and serving and giving and kindness and all of those things, that we all need to do our part. So how do we find out what our spiritual gifts are? Number one, you have to sit down and say, what am I really good at? What is it that I like to do? What is a passion of mine? Where is an area that you find yourself defending people a lot? Like if you see people that are being mean all the time and you go, how can they be so unkind? Maybe kindness is a gift. If you find yourself, I was telling some folks today that secret, don't tell anybody this, but I used to get in trouble in school for talking too much. I did. I know it's hard for you all to believe, but I got in trouble. I used to, you like 1 was really good, and 2 was so-so, and 3 was like needs improvement. There was no 4, but if there would have been a 4 or 5, I would have needed improvement in that area where I could do some things, but I talk too much in class. Now, of course, I talk for a living. And the point is that you could use these gifts for good, or you could use them for evil. So consequently, what is it that you're good at? What do you like to do? What is it that you enjoy? I enjoy teaching. I enjoy coaching. I enjoy consulting. I enjoy those things. So what is it you're good at? Number one. And then number 2, if you're still not sure, talk to a group of, as I said earlier, a group of friends that you can talk to and get with them and say, what do you all think I'm good at? If you had to name something, if you had to identify me with one word, what was the one word that you would use to say, I am Bob Sands is a, or so-and-so is a boom, and see how they come to define that. So that's number 1 and 2. Number 3 is do something. See, we want to sit down and get affirmation from others, but go out and practice. If you even have an inkling that it's in a specific area, go out into that area, step out, see what happens with it. See how if you feel fulfilled when you are doing it. One of the things that happened to me, many of you know this is my second time around at the church that I'm at now. I left in 2000, and it was interesting because I wasn't pastoring, I wasn't speaking regularly in the beginning. I was speaking at a few different churches, and it was funny because I would find myself at 11 o'clock every Sunday morning getting antsy, and yet I wasn't preaching. It was something that was just in my bones. It was the teaching part of what I did. So I started a Sunday school class at the church that I was at. And then I would go speak at other churches when I could. And then I was still doing funerals and things like that because it was who I was. It was what I did. It was the areas that I was strong in. So I had to keep doing that. But find the area that you feel fulfilled in, and then step out there and do it. And keep doing it over and over and over again. And then the question then becomes, well, how do I get better at it? Once I find out what it is, once I find out what that spiritual gift is, how do I get better at it? Do I read a book? Do I attend a seminar? Do I take a class? I mean, there are good, great classes out there. If you feel like it's in speaking and you want to improve your public speaking, you can do that. I think one of the best courses out for that is Dale Carnegie still. But once you find out what it is, just go out and continue to do it over and over and over again. The best teacher is often experience. I know if you're a speaker, you don't want to fail in front of an audience, but watch the videos, go back and see what you did wrong. Look and see what's going on with what you said. I review videos every once in a while still of what I've said and what I've done and where I'm looking at, what I'm doing, I'm touching my face too much, that kind of thing, just to always try to get better. But you learn it most of the time by doing it. There may be things where you can get an education or a class, but don't keep taking class after class after class after class to think that somehow just getting more information is going to make you better. Go out and practice it. That's why Paul said, look, God's given us these things, but then he says, look, go out and do that. Go out and treat people in the right way. Go out and be this with all of your might, because that's what he says. Look, he says, if you have a gift for showing kindness to others, then do it, and do it gladly. If it's giving, then go out and give generously. If you're a teacher, teach well. Like, go do it. Don't just talk about it. Don't just plan for it, but go out and do it. Because here's the thing. God has a purpose for you. And it's going to be usually, and it's definitely going to be in this area of using your spiritual gift. And you never know, as you're using it, what other doors are going to open to you. There are people that are in careers today, in different types of ministries, doing different things that if you said to them 20 years ago, you told them you're going to be doing this and this and this, they would look at you and go, there's no way. And yet, here they are today. And it's usually because they followed that passion. They followed that giftedness. They followed that calling that God had for them. And they kept doing it over and over and over again. And he kept opening more doors and strengthening and growing and helping them to become all that they could be. I got to tell you, God has a purpose for you. He has a grand plan for your life. And the greatest thing that you can do is figure out today what you're gifted at, what you're good at, and then go out and keep doing it over and over and over again. You're going to have to say no to a lot of other things. You're going to probably have to look at some things that may look like great opportunities, but don't fall in that. They do not fall in that area of your spiritual gift. And you may actually have to say no to what is good so that you can say yes to what is great. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I did want to let you know a couple of things. So people that are watching this that don't care about church announcements or anything like that, you can go ahead and we'll see you soon. Make sure you stay tuned on all of our social media channels. We will be back. No, because the hurricane that wasn't for us, which is a good thing. So we'll be back at 9:45 and 11 this coming Sunday. Make sure that you remember that facial coverings are required. And I'm going to wrap up my series in the book of Nehemiah this coming Sunday. And then we're going to be doing a few other things, and then I'll be starting another series. So stay tuned, keep watch here, share this with your friends, and we'll see you soon. God bless you.